Story 1: The Road That Counted Backwards. The mile markers were going the wrong direction. Robert Hayes noticed it at 11:47 p.m., somewhere between Cheyenne and Laramie on I-80, when marker 322 appeared in his headlights, and then 6 minutes later marker 329 slid past. He was heading west. West meant the numbers should be dropping. He'd been driving this corridor for 11 years. He knew these markers the way he knew the sound of his own Jake brake, the particular diesel rattle of his Kenworth T680 at 63 miles per hour. And now the numbers were climbing, and every time he reached for his CB to call it in, his hand just sat there on the microphone and forgot what it was supposed to do. His name was Robert Hayes, 44 years old, 216,000 miles logged across 31 states. He had a daughter in Casper who just turned 8, an ex-wife who still called when something broke at the house, and a load of medical refrigeration equipment he was supposed to deliver to Salt Lake City by 6 a.m. He was behind schedule by 40 minutes because of a construction delay outside of Cheyenne, and he had been pushing 70 where he could, watching the speed display on his Garmin GPS like a hawk. That's when he'd first noticed something wrong with the device, not anything dramatic, just a subtle wrongness. The route line curving in a direction that didn't match the road beneath his wheels. He dismissed it. The GPS units got confused by wind farms sometimes, by the electromagnetic interference from the high-tension lines that marched alongside I-80 like steel giants. He dismissed it and driven on, and now the mile markers were going backward. Marker 334 appeared, then 341, 7 miles in 6 minutes, numbers ascending, Wyoming darkness pressing against his windshield like a held breath. He checked his GPS. It showed him exactly where he should be, moving west on I-80, position confirmed, estimated arrival Salt Lake City 5:48 a.m. The little blue arrow was moving. Progress was being made. But when he looked at the marker glowing in his headlights, 349, he felt something happen in his chest that wasn't quite fear yet. It was the sensation of a floor dropping away. It was the feeling of understanding beginning to fail. Pulled his phone and called dispatch. Reception was 3 bars, clean and clear, no atmospheric noise. The line connected. He heard Marla's voice, third shift operator, the woman who talked him through a blizzard closure in Nebraska 2 winters ago. "Hayes, where are you?" she asked, and there was something funny in her voice, something careful. "I-80 headed west," he said. "I think my GPS is glitching. The markers don't match." A pause, too long, he could hear her typing. "What marker are you at right now?" He looked ahead, watched one approach, braced for the number. Marker 312. His stomach dropped. He'd been at 349 30 seconds ago. 312, he said, Marla typed. The pause stretched longer this time, and when she spoke again her voice had changed, had thinned out as if she were speaking from somewhere far away despite the clean signal. "Robert," she said, and she never used his first name. "That's not possible. Satellite shows your truck at mile marker 312. But I've got your electronic log showing you passed 312 47 minutes ago." He didn't answer right away. He was watching the road, watching marker 298 slide past. The numbers were dropping now, back to dropping, back to normal. He had covered, according to the signs, 51 miles in the wrong direction in less than 12 minutes, and now he was going west again as if nothing had happened. "I'll call you back," he told Marla, and put the phone down and gripped the wheel with both hands. The road looked normal. The sky was that particular Wyoming black where there are so many stars they stop being comforting and start being enormous. His Kenworth hummed. The reefer unit on his trailer clicked through its cooling cycle. Everything was normal. except he couldn't account for 51 miles. He started driving faster. Not panicking, he was too experienced to panic behind the wheel but focused, methodical, trying to work through what he knew. He knew he hadn't stopped. He knew he hadn't turned around. He knew the road was straight here, a long, flat interstate corridor with no exits for 14 miles in either direction. He knew his GPS showed him on track. And he knew that the mile markers were lying, or the GPS was lying, or his eyes were lying. And any one of those three possibilities was bad enough to make his palms sweat against the wheel. What he did not know, what he was refusing to let himself think, was that all three might be telling the truth simultaneously. That reality itself might have a seam running along this particular stretch of Wyoming interstate, and that his truck had hit it at 68 miles per hour and passed through into a place where the rules were negotiating. No new terms. Marker 287, normal. He was making progress. He exhaled. He turned on the radio, found a country station out of Laramie, let the music push at the edges of the quiet. 40 minutes later, he was approaching the 241 marker when his GPS spoke. The Garmin's voice was a woman's, flat and algorithmic, and it said something it had never said to him before. It said, "In 1 mile you will return." He looked at the screen. The route line was still there. Still heading west, still correct. But the turn-by-turn instruction panel, the little box in the corner where it usually said things like "continue straight for 84 miles," now said "return to starting position." He pressed the power button. The screen went dark. He pressed it again. The device booted up, ran through its startup sequence, acquired satellites, and when it finally oriented itself, it showed him not on I-80 westbound, but sitting, perfectly stationary, at a rest stop he had passed an hour and 40 minutes ago. His truck was moving at 68 miles per hour. The GPS said he was parked. His hands were shaking now. Real shaking, the kind that starts in the chest and works out to the fingers. He pressed the GPS power button again, held it down until the device shut off completely, then pushed it into the cup holder face down so he wouldn't have to look at it. He focused on the road, just the road. Just the white lines, the reflectors, the occasional glow of a rest area sign. Just the act of driving, which he knew, which he had always known, which was the one piece of the world he had never doubted. He drove. Marker 231. Marker 228. Dropping correctly, dropping in sequence, Wyoming moving past him at the speed of rational reality. He almost convinced himself it was over when he saw his own tail lights. They appeared in his lane 200 yards ahead, the distinctive red cluster of a Kenworth T680, the exact same light configuration as his own truck. Running at the same speed he was running, maintaining perfect distance, he flashed his brights. The truck ahead didn't react. He reached for his CB, clicked to channel 19. Truck ahead on I-80 westbound, what's your handle? Static, nothing. Any westbound driver at mile 215, come back. The static ate his words. He watched the taillights. He watched the trailer, which was identical to his, the same dimensions, the same reflective tape pattern, the same slight wobble in the suspension that his own trailer did on the right rear axle because of a small defect he'd been meaning to have looked at. He was following himself. He was following an exact copy of his own truck down a Wyoming interstate at midnight, and the copy didn't know he was there, or didn't care, or was waiting. He slowed to 55. The truck ahead slowed to 55. He accelerated to 73. The truck ahead matched him perfectly. He moved to the left lane, so did the truck ahead. He sat there in the left lane of an empty interstate, following his own reflection through a Wyoming night, and tried to remember if he believed in God or fate or the structural integrity of linear time, and found that whatever he'd believed 2 hours ago, he no longer had access to it. He called Marla again. The 3 bars clean. I need you to tell me if there's another Kenworth T680 registered in our fleet on this route tonight. He could hear her checking. No, she said. You're the only one on I-80 westbound from Cheyenne. Someone else then could be any company, more checking. I'm not showing any similar cargo on this corridor. Why? He watched the tail lights. Never mind, he said. As the truck ahead of him vanished at mile marker 192, not gradually, not speeding up or taking an exit, but simply cleanly gone between one blink and the next, the tail lights extinguishing like a candle, the lane in front of him suddenly and perfectly empty. He was alone on the road. He drove the remaining distance to the Utah border in 41 minutes without incident, without anomaly, without any sign that the last 3 hours had been anything other than a normal night run. He arrived in Salt Lake City at 5:52 a.m., 8 minutes early. He backed the refrigeration equipment into the dock with the precision of a man who needed the physical act of doing something correct to feel like the world had weight again. As the dock manager signed his paperwork and looked at his face, "You okay? You look like you haven't slept." "I'm fine," Robert said. The dock manager nodded at the trailer. "Weird thing, your cargo temp log shows a 12-degree spike for about 40 minutes around midnight, right in the middle of nowhere. You lose power to the reefer." Robert looked at the trailer. The reefer unit was humming steadily, temperature nominal, no alarms. "No," he said. Everything ran normal. As the dock manager shrugged and walked away, Robert stood in the Salt Lake City dawn and thought about a 40-minute window where the temperature inside a sealed refree. The gerated trailer had spiked by 12 degrees on a night when the outside temperature was 27, and the reefer unit had never dropped a cycle, and he had been driving normally, and somehow in that window, the laws of thermodynamics had quietly taken a break. He checked his GPS before he left the dock. It had reset completely, journey history cleared, all stored routes gone, every setting returned to factory default. He'd had the device for 4 years. It had never reset itself. He set it up again, entered his home address, and as it was calculating the route, it gave him one final instruction, the same flat, algorithmic woman's voice, the same toneless certainty. "You have been here before." Then the route appeared normal, correct, pointing him back toward Cheyenne along the same interstate he'd driven westbound. He drives I-80 twice a week. He always will. The job doesn't change, the route doesn't change, the Kenworth doesn't change. What changed was something in how the road feels to him now, not threatening, not safe, just watching. Like something out in the Wyoming dark memorized him during those missing 51 miles and keeps the memory stored somewhere beneath the asphalt, waiting for the next time his taillights roll past in the dark. Story 2. What the Way Station WEIGHED. The scale read 41,207 pounds heavier than the load Patricia Sullivan was carrying. She knew her cargo weight to the pound, 12,482, because she had stood in the sun in Phoenix and watched every pallet go on the scale before it was loaded into her refrigerated trailer. She was hauling produce. Honeydew melons and vine tomatoes and bagged spinach headed for a distribution center in Albuquerque. The way station outside of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, showed 53,689 pounds on her drive axles, and the officer in the booth was staring at her ticket with an expression she had never seen on a DOT officer's face before. It was not suspicion. It was confusion sliding toward something worse. Patricia was 51 years old, a 17-year independent owner-operator who had started driving at 34 after a divorce and a realization that the open road suited her personality better than any office ever had. She drove a Peterbilt 389 she'd named Agnes, kept it in near-perfect condition, and had gone 11 years without a single citation. She had a reputation for impeccable logs, spotless inspections, and a calm demeanor that never cracked, not in blizzards, not in traffic, not when a deer exploded through her windshield in Arkansas and she drove 20 miles to a truck stop with blood on her face before she let herself stop. She was not a woman who panicked. She was standing outside the way station at 2:14 in the morning on March 14, 2023, and she was very close to panicking. The DOT officer, his badge read GARZAR, walked her to the back of her trailer and broke the seal. She hadn't asked him to. She'd wanted to argue the scale error, wanted to insist on a reweigh, but something about his expression stopped her. He opened the trailer doors. The light inside the reefer trailer showed exactly what she'd loaded: pallets of produce in neat rows, everything strapped and stacked correctly, nothing shifted, nothing wrong. Except the weight. Except the impossible, unexplained 41,000-pound discrepancy. Garza shone his flashlight across the produce. He walked in, she followed him. The trailer smelled like it always did, that particular cold sweetness of refrigerated vegetables, the slight bitterness of spinach. Nothing wrong with the smell, nothing wrong with anything she could see. And then Garza's flashlight found the back wall. There were handprints in the condensation on the interior rear wall, dozens of them. Small, human-sized, pressed flat against the metal as if from the inside. As if something had been pushing against the back of her trailer from within a sealed, locked, alarmed unit that she had personally loaded, locked, sealed, and alarmed in a Phoenix distribution center 6 hours ago. Garza didn't say anything. Patricia didn't say anything. She counted the handprints because her mind needed something to do. 17 hands, some overlapping, some distinct, all roughly the same size, not children's hands, not adults, something in between, all pressed flat, fingers together, palms flat, in the posture of someone pressing against a wall for warmth, or pressing against a door to be let out. Garza walked the length of the trailer. He knocked on the floor. He knocked on the walls. He shone his light into the spaces behind pallets and around crates and everywhere a person might be concealed. Nothing. Nobody. The trailer held 8,482 pounds of produce and 41,207 pounds of something thaw. T had no physical presence, cast no shadow, left no footprint on the metal floor except those 17 sets of handprints in the condensation. He walked back to her and said quietly, "I need you to wait here." He went to his station and made a phone call. She stood beside her open trailer in the New Mexico dark, listening to the refrigeration unit cycling, and looked at the handprints and tried to construct a rational explanation for any of this and failed. She climbed into the trailer. She didn't know why. Some instinct, the same instinct that had made her keep driving with deer blood on her face, the same stubbornness that had kept her in this job for 17 years when everyone said a woman alone on the road was asking for trouble. She walked to the back wall and stood in front of the handprints. Up close, they were startlingly detailed. She could see fingerprint ridges in the condensation. She pressed her own hand against the wall next to one of them. The metal was colder than it should have been. The reefer unit maintained 41 degrees, but the wall beneath her palm felt like standing ice, like something below zero, like touching winter itself. She pulled her hand away. Her handprint joined the others. 18 sets now. That's when the weight shifted. She felt it through her boots, a massive, subtle redistribution of mass, something enormous settling in the trailer around her as if whatever had been pressing against the walls had turned around. She spun. The trailer was empty. But the floor under her feet was suddenly wrong. She could feel the give of it differently, the way you feel a bridge under your feet instead of solid ground, a subtle flex that told you there was space below. She had driven this trailer for 4 years. She knew every sound it made. She did not recognize the sound she heard now, a low, sustained geological pressure from below the trailer floor, as if the ground beneath the way station had developed an opinion. She jumped out of the trailer. Garza was coming back from his station with a second officer, younger, male, his hand resting on his radio in the way that meant he wasn't sure what protocol applied. She walked toward them. "I need to know what your scale is actually reading," she said. Garza checked his clipboard. 53,689, same as before. "Reweigh me," she said. They looked at each other. "Ma'am, reweigh me." She pulled Agnes off the scale pad and back onto it. As the digital display climbed, stopped. The number it stopped at was 12,482, her actual cargo weight exactly. As if nothing had ever been different, Garza wrote something on her ticket. The younger officer walked around the outside of the trailer, shining his light on the tires, the undercarriage, the landing gear, finding nothing. "Everything checks out," Garza said, handing her the ticket. There was something in his voice that matched the look from earlier, that confusion pushing towards something he didn't have a word for. "You're free to go." "The handprints," she said. He stopped. "What handprints?" She walked him to the back of the trailer. The interior rear wall was clean. The condensation was undisturbed, a smooth uniform frost across the metal. No handprints. No sign that any handprints had ever been there. Garza looked at the clean wall and then at her and said nothing. The younger officer had moved upwind of the trailer. Patricia could see from his posture that he wanted to be somewhere else. She drove the rest of the way to Albuquerque with the interior trailer camera, a unit she'd installed for cargo liability purposes, recording the empty interior. She arrived at the distribution center at 5:30 a.m., backed into the dock, and pulled the camera's SD card before she let anyone touch the trailer doors. The footage showed, in 41 consecutive minutes, somewhere between truth or consequences and Sakuro, something she has not described to anyone in precise terms. She has said only that the produce moved, not fell, not shifted from the suspension bounce. Moved with intention. She has said that the spinach bags rose one by one and pressed themselves against the interior rear wall with the uniformity of hands, and that the camera's audio captured, beneath the refrigeration noise, something that sounded like breath, slow, cold, synchronized breath, for 41 minutes while she drove 70 miles per hour through the New Mexico dark with no knowledge of what was happening 6 feet behind her head. She sold Agnes 3 weeks later, sold her at a loss, something she swore she would never do. The buyer was a young driver from El Paso who drove away happy, who had no idea what the scale at truth or consequences weighed in that trailer on March 14th, who didn't know about the handprints or the footage or the 41 minutes. Patricia went back to dispatch driving for a small outfit in Phoenix. No over. HT runs, no solo routes through the southwestern desert. She still hauls, still drives, still loves the road the way she always has. She just doesn't park near way stations anymore. Doesn't slow down when she sees the lights. She pays her overweight fines by mail from a safe distance rather than roll across a scale that might find something inside her cargo that she put nothing in. Somewhere the footage still exists. She kept the SD card. She has not deleted it and cannot bring herself to watch it again, but she keeps it in the same jockey box drawer where she keeps her logbook and her emergency cash and the photograph of her mother. The things she can't leave behind, even when she's tried. Story 3: Signal Ghost. Marcus Chen had been talking to his wife for 6 minutes before he realized she'd been dead for 8 months. He'd pulled off at a rest area on I-55 south of Memphis, tired enough that his eyes were crossing, and called home out of habit. The same call he made every night at 11, same number he'd dialed for 9 years. She'd answered on the second ring. Said his name the way she always said his name. with the slight exasperation of someone who knew exactly how long he'd been on the road and was calculating whether to worry. He'd told her about the day, the load pickup in Chicago, the rain coming down like something personal, the diner outside of Bloomington where the coffee tasted like automotive fluid. She'd listened and made the small sounds she always made, the affirmation sounds, the and of course, and you're always saying that. And he'd felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease, the specific relaxation of a man coming home, even over a phone line, even from 2 states away. Then she told him about her day. She told him about the weather in St. Louis, overcast, trying to rain but not committing. She'd told him the neighbor's dog had gotten into the yard again. She'd told him she was tired. And Marcus had said very carefully, without any expression in his voice, May died in January. A pause on the line, just long enough, just wrong enough. Then the voice said, I know. Marcus Chen was 47, a company driver for a Midwest freight carrier, running the Chicago to Memphis corridor 3 times a week in a Freightliner Cascadia with 312,000 miles on the engine. He had been doing this run for 6 of the 9 years he'd been driving, and the route was so familiar he sometimes thought he could drive it unconscious, could let his hands do it while the rest of him went somewhere else. He had been doing exactly that for the last 3 hours, somewhere between functioning and not, keeping himself awake with black coffee and the audiobook version of a thriller he'd already read twice. His wife May had died on January 9, 2023 of an aneurysm, 43 years old. 11 months of marriage and then nothing. A Tuesday morning, a phone call from her office asking why she hadn't come in. He had identified her at the hospital. He had closed their account and kept the number because he couldn't make himself do anything that felt like the period at the end of a sentence. I know, the voice had said, and then, Marcus, you shouldn't stop at this rest area. He was out of the truck before he'd consciously decided to move, standing in the rest area parking lot in the Memphis summer heat at 11 p.m., phone pressed to his ear, listening to the rain on the asphalt. Why not? He asked. His voice was steady. He was a man who had survived the worst thing and knew that nothing after that could surprise him. He was wrong. Because of what's parked in spot 17, the voice said. He turned. He counted the spots in the yellow sodium light. There were 16 trucks in the lot. Spot 17 was empty. There's nothing in 17, he said. There will be, the voice said. In 4 minutes, don't be here when it arrives. He stood in the rain and looked at spot 17. It was an ordinary parking space, marked with painted lines with a concrete wheel stop at the far end, surrounded by the same tired asphalt as every other truck stop he'd ever sat in. Nothing distinguished it, nothing made it threatening. He was being given instructions by a voice that spoke like his dead wife on a phone line to a number that no longer had service, and he was standing in the rain counting minutes. He got back in the truck. He did not drive away. He should have. He wanted to. But he sat in the Cascadia with the engine running and watched spot 17 in his driver's side mirror because he was a man who needed to know, and because the voice had told him not to be there when the thing arrived, not that he couldn't watch from a distance. The 4 minutes passed. Nothing happened. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He almost convinced himself the voice, whatever the voice was, had been wrong or lying, or that he was experiencing a specific form of grief-induced auditory hallucination that manifested as warning. 4 minutes and 47 seconds. The truck that pulled into spot 17 had no lights. Not just headlights off, no clearance lights, no running lights, no marker lights, none of the constellation of indicators that keep a 65-foot semi visible in parking lots and on highways. It was dark. It was so completely dark that the truck seemed to be cut from the surrounding darkness like a shape removed from paper. a negative space that existed because the yellow sodium lights couldn't penetrate it. It was a flatbed or something that had been a flatbed, loaded with shapes covered in tarps that didn't move the way tarps move, didn't shift, didn't flutter in the rain, were absolutely still in a way that suggested the shapes beneath them were absolutely rigid. It backed into spot 17 in total silence. No engine sound, no air brakes, no reverse beeper. Just the dark shape moving and then stopping, perfectly positioned as if it had done this 10,000 times. A driver got out. Marcus watched in his mirror. The figure was average height, average build, wearing a rain jacket, completely ordinary in every external detail. The figure walked toward the rest area building, the bathrooms, the vending machines, the map station nobody used anymore, walked normally. And as the figure passed under one of the sodium lights, Marcus saw its shadow. The shadow fell wrong. The light source was behind and to the left. The shadow should have projected forward and to the right. The shadow projected straight down, directly beneath the figure at noon, even though the light was not above. He picked up his phone. The voice answered on the first ring. "What's on that flatbed?" he asked, a pause longer than the last one. "You had 17 good years," the voice said. "Before the job and before me, you know what you were supposed to do with them." He said, "May," the voice said, "leave now, don't look at the tarp." As he looked at the tarp, he needed to. He put the Cascadia in reverse, ready to pull out, but he looked, and one of the shapes under the tarps was moving. Not the tarp itself, not wind, not the truck settling, but the shape underneath, rotating very slowly. And as it rotated, the tarp conformed to it with the fidelity of a second skin, showing him the outline of something that had too many joints, that bent in places joints don't belong, that was oriented vertically when the flatbed's orientation required things to be horizontal. He put the truck in drive and pulled out of the rest area at 30 miles per hour, which is too fast for a rest area, and he knew it and didn't care, and merged onto I-55 southbound and drove 80 miles without stopping. He called the number again at 1 a.m. when he was safely past Jackson, and the thing at the rest area was 100 miles behind him. The line connected. Not May's voice this time, just static. Just the particular thick static of a dead line, of a number with no service, of the specific sound of nothing pretending to be something. He let it play for 2 minutes. Then he heard very faintly beneath the static a sound he recognized, the particular clicking of his wife's rings against her phone when she held it, a sound she made when she was thinking, 3 soft taps of gold against glass. Tap, tap, tap. Then the line went dead for good. He reported the dark truck to the rest area management when he got to Memphis. They reviewed the security footage. The footage showed spot 17 empty all night, no vehicles, no drivers, no movement. They showed him the timestamp. They showed him the frame where he sat in the lot for almost 5 minutes before pulling out for no visible reason. They were not unkind about it. Long-haul drivers were known to experience sleep deprivation events. He knew they weren't wrong. He drives the corridor still. He passes that rest area twice a week, always after 10 p.m. He never stops there. He calls the dead number sometimes when the miles get long and the night gets the kind of heavy that only truckers who run the midnight corridors understand, the weight of too much silence and not enough sleep, and the road stretching forward forever into darkness. The number is always dead, static, nothing. Except sometimes, deep enough in the white noise that he's not sure if he's hearing it or making it up, 3 soft taps of gold against glass. And he grips the wheel and drives faster and doesn't look at the rest areas he passes and tries not to think about what's parked in spot 17 of every lot he's passed since Memphis. Story 4, The Town AT, the end of Exit 44. Deanna Kowalski had been in the town for 6 hours before she understood there was no way out. The first sign she missed. The people she kept seeing were always the same people in different clothes. The second sign she almost caught. Every business on the main street was closed, but the closed signs were W. Armed to the touch as if someone had just flipped them. The sign she couldn't ignore. The highway on-ramp she'd come in on didn't go anywhere. It curved up from the street, smooth and properly marked, and then ended in midair in a clean edge of asphalt hanging over nothing, like a diving board over a pool with no water. She had driven into Haversham, Iowa on exit 44 of U.S. Highway 30. She had driven into Haversham on the morning of October 22nd, 2022, in her international LT with a load of furniture bound for Des Moines. She had not driven out. Deanna was 39, the only female driver for a mid-sized furniture company out of Rockford, Illinois, and she had taken the Haversham exit because her GPS had insisted on it, rerouting her twice when she tried to stay on US 30. The third time it rerouted her, the highway itself had changed, the exits renumbered, the distance signs giving wrong information, the road seeming to gently, persistently orient itself toward the Haversham exit no matter how she corrected. She was experienced enough to recognize when a GPS was leading her wrong. She was not experienced enough to recognize when the road itself was. Haversham was charming in the specific way of small Iowa towns: grain elevator, water tower, a main street with a diner and a hardware store and a barber shop. Population sign read 847. There was a gas station. She'd pulled in for fuel and the pump had worked. She'd paid at the machine, gotten a receipt dated October 22nd, put 9 gallons in Agnes, and climbed back in feeling only mildly irritated about the detour. She'd tried to navigate back to US 30 and found herself, after 20 minutes of driving, at the gas station again. She'd tried 3 other roads out of town. Each one had, with different scenery along the way, deposited her back at the main intersection. And that was when she'd looked at the on-ramp she'd come in on and understood what the clean edge of asphalt meant. She approached the diner. She needed a phone. Her cell service had dropped to 0 the moment she'd taken the exit, and the truck's satellite communicator was showing an error she'd never seen before, a single word: position. She needed someone to tell her how to get to US 30. She needed this to be a navigation error, a bad loop road, some explainable small-town road design problem. She pushed open the diner door. The bell above it rang. Everyone inside looked up. There were 11 people in the diner. She recognized all of them from the street. She was absolutely certain she had seen all 11 of these faces in the 40 minutes she'd spent driving Haversham's streets, and she was equally certain that not enough time had passed for all of them to have arrived here before her. They looked at her with expressions of polite welcome and something beneath that, something that moved behind their eyes like a thought they were suppressing. "Morning," said the woman behind the counter. "You must be new." She ordered coffee and asked about US 30. The waitress, her name tag said Ruth, and Deanna had seen her face in the window of the hardware store 40 minutes earlier, which meant Ruth had gotten from the hardware store to the diner impossibly fast. Ruth said, "Most folks find their way out eventually." Most folks, not "you'll find your way," most folks. Implying that some folks didn't. Implying that finding your way out was a statistical outcome, not a guarantee. Deanna put her coffee down. "How long have some of them been here?" Ruth wiped the counter with a cloth. "Raymond's been here since August." She nodded toward a man at the end of the counter, heavyset, 50s, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been worn for weeks. He was eating pancakes with the mechanical focus of someone eating because it was time to eat, not because he was hungry. He didn't look up. She talked to Raymond. His name was Raymond Garrett, a OTR driver from Minnesota who had taken exit 44 on August 19th with a load of landscaping materials. His satellite communicator showed the same error position. His phone had no signal. He had tried every road out of Haversham and gotten back to the main intersection each time. He had been sleeping in his cab. The townspeople were hospitable, they fed him, they were friendly, nobody prevented him from doing anything, but nobody could tell him how to leave. When he asked directly, they answered obliquely. "You'll figure it out," they said. "Some folks do," they said. He'd been in Haversham for 64 days. He'd stopped trying to drive out after the first week. He'd stopped asking the townspeople after the third week. He was eating pancakes on a Tuesday morning in a diner in a town that wasn't on any map she'd ever seen. And he looked like a man who had made his peace with an outcome he couldn't prevent. Deanna was not prepared to make that peace. She spent 4 hours systematically driving every road in Haversham. She counted 7. And mapping them on a notebook she kept in the cab. Each road led back. She measured the return distance on her odometer. Road 1, 3.2 miles out, returned to main intersection after 4.1 miles. Road 4, 1.7 miles out, returned after 2.9. The outbound and return distances didn't match. She was not driving in circles. She was driving in something that wasn't geometrically possible. Roads that ate distance going out and produced different distance coming back. A town with internal geography that violated the relationship between space and travel. She sat in the main intersection and wrote the numbers down and stared at them, and they refused to make sense. On her second night, because she had no choice, because there was nowhere else, she slept in the cab. She locked the doors. She set an alarm. At 3:17 a.m. something knocked on her driver's side door, not loud, deliberate, 3 knocks evenly spaced. She looked. There was no one there. The street was empty. The town was dark except for the diner's neon sign, which was still lit. She had not seen it go dark since she arrived, had not seen the diner close. She sat in the dark and breathed and told herself the knock was the cab cooling, was metal contracting in the night air, was a normal sound of a normal night. At 3:19 the knock came again, 3 times, evenly spaced. Different location, rear of the cab behind her head. At 3:21 it came from below, from the frame of the truck, directly beneath her seat. 3 knocks, measuring her, testing. She drove again at first light, not because she expected different results, but because the alternative was sitting still, and sitting still felt like the thing that had kept Raymond in the diner for 64 days. She drove Road 3, the one that had given her the most anomalous distance readings, and she drove it differently. She drove it with her odometer watched and her GPS useless for navigation, but still recording speed and distance, running and her notebook open on the passenger seat. At 1.4 miles, the road curved left. She had always followed the curve. She had always gotten the diner back. She didn't follow the curve. She kept going straight onto what looked like a farm access road, overgrown and gravel, and clearly not a road in any official sense. She drove it anyway. The GPS lost its satellite fix. The odometer climbed. The road went through a field and then into a tree line and then through the trees and then up a slight grade and then the asphalt reappeared. Real asphalt, Iowa State Highway asphalt, and a green sign overhead that said us 30 north. And the on-ramp opened up in front of her like a held breath released. She accelerated to 60 before she was fully on the highway. She kept accelerating. She called her dispatcher at 72 miles per hour and said she'd been stuck in a detour and was now back en route, 2 days late, and the dispatcher said 2 days and she said yes, 2 days. She did not explain Haversham. She did not explain Raymond Garrett eating pancakes in August with no intention of leaving. She did not explain the knocking or the impossible road geometry or the on-ramp that ended in midair over nothing. She drove to Des Moines and delivered the furniture. and slept for 14 hours in a motel with all the lights on. She looked up Haversham, Iowa when she got home. There was nothing, no town, no census record, no map entry. She found a trucker forum post from 2019 mentioning an Iowa GPS anomaly on US 30 that rerouted drivers to a service road. 3 responses. 2 people said they'd experienced the same rerouting and ignored it. One person, username RAYMONDMN57, had posted, "Don't take it. Whatever your GPS tells you, don't take exit 44." His last post was August 18, 2022, one day before he would have taken the exit, before he would have started eating pancakes. She flagged the forum post and tried to message Raymond MN57. The account had been deactivated. She drove us 30 once more 6 months later on a route she couldn't avoid. She drove past the exit 44 marker at 70 miles per hour without slowing. She kept her eyes on the road ahead and her hands steady on the wheel. In her peripheral vision, for exactly the 3 seconds it took to pass, she could see the town of Haversham down the exit ramp, the water tower, the diner sign, the main street, and a heavy-set man in the parking lot of the gas station, standing very still, watching her drive past. She did not slow down. She drove. A Story 5 Manifest. The shipping manifest said Thomas Keene was carrying himself. He found the error, if error was the word, at a fuel stop in Amarillo at 3 a.m. when he pulled the paperwork to check the weight class before a weigh station ahead. Consignee Keene Thomas R. Description of goods 1 unit organic. Weight 192 lbs. His exact weight, his name. His ID number at th. Top, which was only on internal company documents he'd never shared with anyone, stamped across paperwork for a load he'd picked up 7 hours ago in Oklahoma City. He flipped to the bill of lading. Shipper, unregistered, origin not applicable. Special handling instructions, do not open before delivery. And at the bottom, in the same typeface as every other official document in his folder, a delivery address that was his own home address in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thomas Keene was 56, a 22-year veteran of long-haul trucking, currently hauling what the legitimate upper documents said was industrial piping for a construction company in Phoenix. The piping was real, he'd watched it get loaded, knew its weight and length and the way it shifted on curves. The industrial piping was in the trailer, he knew this. But somewhere in the paperwork folder beneath the real documents was a manifest for something else, something that weighed exactly as much as he did, consigned to his home, shipped from nowhere. He sat in the Amarillo truck stop and read the manifest 4 times, and each time it said the same thing. Then he got out and opened the trailer. The piping was there. 40-foot steel sections, banded and blocked, sitting exactly as loaded. He climbed in with his flashlight and walked the length of the trailer and found nothing that shouldn't be there, no hidden cargo, no concealed compartment, no explanation. He climbed back out. He got back in the cab. He put the manifest on the passenger seat and drove. He told himself it was a paperwork error, a misprint, a joke someone in Oklahoma City thought was funny. He told himself these things and didn't believe any of them, because he'd been in this industry long enough to know what paperwork errors looked like, and they didn't look like this. They looked like wrong zip codes and transposed item numbers. They did not look like your own name and your own weight and your home address and the instruction not to open something before delivery. He called his dispatcher at 4 a.m. He'd pulled over on I-40 west of Amarillo on the flat Texas panhandle where the dark went on forever in every direction, and he described the manifest. His dispatcher, a man named Pete who had been with the company for 30 years and thought he'd heard everything, went quiet for a long moment. Then Pete asked him to photograph the document and send it. Thomas did. Pete received it. Another long silence. Thomas, Pete said finally, that document isn't in our system. We don't have any record of that manifest number, that shipper code, or that order. Whoever created this used our format exactly, but it didn't come from us. Thomas sat with that. Then where did it come from? Another silence. I don't know, Pete said. Who had access to your paperwork folder? Thomas thought about it. The folder had been in his cab all day, locked. He had the only key. Nobody, he said. Pete said, okay. Then, Thomas, how do you feel? Fine, Thomas said. Why? Because, Pete said slowly, carefully, like a man stepping onto ice he wasn't sure would hold, the manifest lists a pickup time of 4:17 a.m. It's 4:14 right now. He locked the cab doors. Both of them, driver and passenger, thumb locks engaged. Then the master lock he kept for parking in rough areas. He sat in the locked cab in the Texas panhandle dark and watched the clock on his dashboard and tried to decide what he was afraid of. He didn't know what was supposed to happen at 4:17. He didn't know if anything was supposed to happen at 4:17, if the time was a coincidence or a threat or a piece of information he didn't have the context to interpret. He watched the seconds tick over. 4:15, the road outside was empty. No trucks, no cars, nothing in either direction, just I-40 lying flat and black across the Texas dark. 4:16, his phone rang. Not Pete, a different number, one he didn't recognize, a 505 area code which was New Mexico, which was Albuquerque. He answered it. He heard himself, his own voice on the other end of the line saying, "Don't stop, whatever they told you, don't stop." The voice was his, same pitch, same slight northeastern accent he'd never fully shed, same way he dropped the G in ing words when he was tired. "Who is this?" he asked and heard himself say, "You know who this is, don't stop, don't open the trailer until you're past Phoenix, drive straight through, don't stop for anything." "What's in the trailer?" he asked. His own voice on the phone line from Albuquerque said, "You don't want to know what's in the trailer." Then the line disconnected. He sat for 30 more seconds. The clock read 4:17. Then he started driving. He drove because the voice, his voice, whatever it was, told him to, and because he had no other instruction that seemed more reliable. He drove because the alternative was sitting in a locked cab in the Texas dark waiting for whatever was supposed to happen. Then at 4:17, and that alternative felt fundamentally wrong in the way that only genuine intuition, not fear but bone-deep recognition, can make a situation feel. He drove at 82 miles per hour, which was illegal and which he didn't care about. And he kept both hands on the wheel and the radio off and the windows up, and he did not stop. He almost made it to Phoenix without incident. Almost. At mile marker 89 on I-40 in Arizona, 40 miles east of the city, he looked in his driver's side mirror and saw someone sitting in the passenger seat. Not in his peripheral vision in the mirror, which showed him the interior of the cab. The passenger seat, which was locked and empty, held a figure in a dark jacket facing forward, hands in its lap. He did not turn his head. He looked at the mirror. The figure was his height, his build, his hair color, visible only from behind. It sat with his posture, the slight forward lean he'd had since a back injury in 2015, the way he rested his hands palm down on his thighs when he wasn't holding anything. It was sitting in his truck. He did not turn his head. He watched the mirror. The figure did not move, did not turn, sat with the patience of something that had been sitting for a long time and was used to waiting. He drove the 40 miles to Phoenix. He did not look at the passenger seat. He watched the mirror and the figure sat, and neither of them spoke and neither of them moved except for the motion of the truck itself carrying them forward. He pulled into the Phoenix construction yard at 6:44 a.m. He backed into the unloading bay. He shut off the engine. He sat for 3 seconds and then turned to look at the passenger seat. Empty, clean, nothing. He got out and walked to the back of the trailer and broke the seal and opened the doors. The piping was there. All of it correctly loaded, nothing disturbed, nothing else. No hidden cargo, no organic unit, one weighing 192 pounds. He unloaded and drove back. He found the manifest in his paperwork folder when he went to file his records at the end of the week. It was still there. He hadn't thrown it out, he'd been afraid to throw it out, the way you're afraid to throw away something you don't understand in case understanding it later requires having it. He looked at it again. His name, his weight, his address, his ID. And at the bottom, in a section he hadn't noticed before, below the delivery instructions, delivered successfully. Recipient NOTIFIED. Date, October 24th, 2023, the date of the run. He had not been delivered, he was holding the manifest. He was standing in the company office in Albuquerque, alive and whole, and holding the evidence of his own successful delivery, and he did not know what that meant. He still has the manifest. He's had it laminated, which was either the most rational thing he could do with it or the least. He carries it in the same folder as his CDL and his medical certificate and his logbook, the documents that prove he is who he says he is, that he exists in the way documented people exist. Sometimes on long runs, when the night gets big and the road gets empty and the cab gets quiet, he takes the manifest out and reads it. A consignee, Keen Thomas R. Description of goods, 1 unit organic, delivered successfully. And he puts it back in the folder and drives because driving is the only thing that makes the manifest feel like a mistake. Stopping makes it feel like a receipt. Story 6, The Road That FEEDS. The GPS rerouted for the 14th time at 2:47 in the morning, and Robert Hayes understood with sudden, nauseating clarity that the road he was on had never existed on any map he'd ever seen. He understood this not because the screen told him so, but because the road was getting narrower. Not gradually. Not the way a two-lane highway thins into a rural route. The asphalt was physically contracting. He could see it in his headlights, the painted center line sliding closer to his driver's side mirror with each half-mile, as if the road itself was slowly, deliberately swallowing his truck from the outside in. Robert had been driving flatbed for 19 years, mostly Midwest runs, the kind of meat and potatoes haul that put mileage on a truck and money in a savings account and not much else. He was 51 years old, divorced once, estranged from a son who decided somewhere around his 20s that Robert hadn't been present enough, and he had learned to make peace with the long miles and the silence. He was driving a load of structural steel beams from Kansas City to Denver on the night of October 3rd, 2023, when the GPS, a brand new Rand McNally unit his dispatch had installed specifically for this route, began its rerouting sequence for the first time at the I-70 interchange outside Salina, Kansas. Well, he hadn't thought much of it initially. Reroutes happened, construction happened, he'd followed the blue line onto what appeared to be a county road, flat and dark and straight as a ruler. And he'd driven 17 miles before he noticed the first thing that was wrong. There were no mile markers. Not damaged markers, not missing markers. No posts, no reflector clips. No evidence that markers had ever been placed here, which was impossible on any maintained county road in the state of Kansas. He'd slowed down and turned on his four-ways and called dispatch, and dispatch told him the GPS unit was showing him on a county route in Ellsworth County and that there was no reported construction on I-70 and that he should maybe just turn around. He'd agreed. He'd attempted to turn around. The road was 22 feet wide at that point. His trailer was 53 feet long. Standard arithmetic, he'd done this dance 1,000 times in tight spots. He pulled forward to get angle. The front wheels hit gravel and his headlights swept across an open field and then swept back as he reversed and the headlights swept again, and when they completed their arc and pointed forward once more, the road behind him, the 17 miles he'd already driven, was gone. Not obscured by darkness. Gone. The asphalt terminated 6 feet behind his rear axle, as clean as a cut edge, and beyond that there was only black Kansas earth and the smell of turned soil and something else. Something underneath the soil smell that Robert's brain categorized before his conscious mind caught up. The smell was copper. The smell was blood. He sat with the engine idling and his Jake brake set, and both hands on the wheel for what he estimated was 4 minutes. Though his phone log would later show 22 minutes of dead air during a call with his dispatcher that Robert did not remember placing. The GPS rerouted. A turn left in .3 miles, it said, in the calm female voice that had been guiding him since Kansas City. He drove forward because there was no driving back. The road narrowed to 18 feet by the time he reached the turn. He took it because the alternative was the terminating edge of impossible asphalt and the blood smell of the field. The new road was paved in the same gray asphalt, but the texture was wrong, too smooth, almost polished, and his headlights reflected off it in a way that asphalt should not reflect. A way that reminded him of water, or of glass, or of something alive and wet. The GPS rerouted a second time 4 miles later, and this time it didn't announce a turn. It said something Robert had never heard a GPS say in 19 years of driving. It said, "You are approaching a rest area. Mandatory stop ahead." He had not pressed the rest area button. He had no rest area preferences programmed into this unit. He knew this because his dispatcher had set it up from scratch 2 days ago and he'd watched the whole process. The mandatory stop, the GPS repeated, in .7 miles. The road was 16 feet wide now. He could see the paint on his passenger mirror brushing the air above the shoulder. There was no shoulder, the asphalt edge dropped 6 inches to raw earth and then the earth simply continued, flat and featureless in every direction. No fences, no trees, no lights from farmhouses. Kansas had farmhouses. You could drive anywhere in Kansas and see farmhouse lights on the horizon the way you could always see stars. The lights were simply part of the landscape. There were no lights. There was nothing in any direction except the road ahead and the severed road behind, and the GPS counting down the distance to a mandatory stop Robert had not requested. A .4 miles. He called his wife ex-wife, but the phone rang through to voicemail. He called his dispatcher again. The phone showed full bars and attempted the call, and the call connected, and he heard breathing on the other end, slow and rhythmic and too loud, the way breathing sounds when someone holds a phone directly against their open mouth. He said hello 3 times. The breathing continued. Then a voice he did not recognize said his name, not Robert, not Hayes. His full name, in a tone that sounded like someone reading a name off a list. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat and gripped the wheel with both hands. A .1 miles. The rest area materialized out of the dark like a stage set being assembled from nothing. Fluorescent lights under a metal canopy, 2 parking spaces for big rigs, a concrete building with painted-over windows and a door and a sign that said facilities. A trash can, a picnic table bolted to a concrete pad. Everything in its place, everything precisely as a rest area should be, and every single element of it smelling of copper. Robert did not stop. He kept driving. He pressed the accelerator down and held it, and the road was 14 feet wide, and he could hear his mirrors skimming the asphalt on either side now, the soft scraping sound of metal on road, and the GPS said recalculating. And then it said, recalculating. And then it said nothing at all, the screen going dark, and Robert drove for 6 miles in absolute darkness with the mirrors scraping and the road narrowing and the smell thickening, until he was certain the road was going to close around his truck like a fist, and he was going to feel the steel of his own rig pressing in from all sides. The lights of I-70 appeared on the horizon. The road widened instantly, not gradually. 1 second, 14 feet and mirrors grinding on asphalt. The next, the full width of a county road. The Rand McNally unit powered back on with a chime and showed him 3 miles from the I-70 on-ramp and gave him a cheerful return to route announcement. As he drove to Denver, he delivered his load. He drove home. He did not report what had happened because he spent the drive home constructing reasons it hadn't happened. He'd drifted, he'd dreamed, he'd hallucinated from fatigue. 3 weeks later, his dispatcher called him about the Rand McNally unit. The GPS company had flagged it. The device had logged his route. The county road he'd traveled, Route 40B in Ellsworth County, had been officially decommissioned in 1971 after a series of accidents that the Kansas Department of Transportation described only as infrastructural anomalies. The road had been physically removed. The asphalt had been torn up. The roadbed had been salted. When Robert asked what kind of accidents, there was a pause on the line. In trucks, his dispatcher said, 4 trucks over about 18 months. They'd go in and then they'd find the loads, the cargo, but the trucks themselves were just compressed, like something had pressed them from the sides, and the drivers were. Well, his dispatcher stopped. The drivers were inside, he finally said, or what was left of them was. Robert still drives. He has a new GPS unit. He programs his routes manually and verifies every road against a paper map before he drives it, the way truckers did before the technology was supposed to make things simpler. He doesn't take reroutes anymore. When the screen says new route found, he pulls over, he checks his paper map, he verifies the road exists. Last month, somewhere east of Amarillo on I-40, his new GPS rerouted without warning. He pulled over immediately. He checked his map. The suggested road was on the map, a county route clearly marked and labeled. He sat for 11 minutes deciding. Then he smelled it, faint through his ventilation system, through the diesel smell and the dust. Copper. He put the truck in gear and drove straight, ignoring the reroute, adding 4 hours to his trip. He didn't tell anyone why. There was nothing to tell. There was only the smell and what the smell meant, and the fact that somewhere, on a road that had been salted and removed and erased from the landscape, something was still waiting for the next driver who followed the GPS without looking at the map first. The Rand McNally unit that logged Robert's route was destroyed per company policy. The GPS company's policy on anomalous routing data is deletion after 90 days. The route exists in no database Robert has been able to access, but it exists. He knows that with the certainty of someone who felt the mirrors scraping the road, felt the road closing, felt the pressure building on either side of his cab like something testing the give of metal. It's still there, the road is still there, and it is still hungry. A story 17 minutes behind. Patricia Sullivan was talking to herself on the CB radio when she realized the voice answering her wasn't her own. It was close, same cadence, same Kansas twang, same habit of dropping the G off present participles. But it was off by something she couldn't immediately name, the way a recording of your own voice sounds wrong until you understand that what's wrong is that you're hearing it from the outside for the first time. She keyed the mic again and said, "Breaker 19, anybody copy?" And the voice that came back said, "Breaker 19, anybody copy?" And she understood then what was wrong. It wasn't an echo, the response came too fast. Fractions of a second, faster than sound traveled and bounced back, faster than another driver could respond. The voice was waiting for her. The voice was ready. Patricia had been running long haul for 11 years, mostly the I-44 corridor between St. Louis and Oklahoma City, and she had developed the trucker's particular immunity to loneliness that came from making peace with 400 miles of Oklahoma highway at 3 in the morning. She was 44, practical, unimaginative in ways she considered virtues. She did not scare easily. She had driven through a tornado warning outside Tulsa that took a Peterbilt off the road 200 yards ahead of her, and had filed an incident report, and continued to her delivery window because that was what you did. She was eastbound on I-44 on February 8, 2020. A Tie-3 running a refrigerated load of produce from Oklahoma City to St. Louis when her Garmin GPS unit, an updated model with real-time traffic integration, began displaying an anomaly she'd never seen in 11 years of using GPS navigation. A second blue position marker, identical to her own, running exactly 17 minutes behind her on the same highway. As she'd assumed it was a glitch, she'd tapped the screen. The second marker persisted. She zoomed in. The marker was labeled with her own truck's ID number, Pat 7734. Her truck was Pat 7734. There were not two Pat 7734s on I-44. She was the only Pat 7734 in the entire fleet. She called dispatch and described the duplicate marker. Her dispatcher, a veteran named Carl who had heard everything, went quiet for 8 seconds and then said he'd look into it and called back 4 minutes later to tell her his tracking software was showing only one Pat 7734 at her current position and that her GPS unit must be malfunctioning. As she accepted this, she drove another 40 miles. The second marker maintained its 17-minute gap with eerie precision, not 16 minutes 50 seconds, not 17 minutes 10 seconds. Exactly 17 minutes, as though whatever was following her had been programmed to follow at exactly that distance, no more, no less. At the wait station outside Miami, Oklahoma, she pulled in for her mandatory stop. She sat in the scale lane and watched her GPS while the attendant processed her paperwork. The second marker continued moving on the screen. It did not slow. It did not stop at the wait station. It passed through the wait station icon without pausing and continued east on I-44 at a constant 63 miles per hour, which was Patricia's exact cruising speed. And as she watched it move through the wait station, she became aware of something she had not considered. She hadn't stopped at the wait station voluntarily. The light had been green. She'd pulled in on impulse, on habit, without being flagged. She had given herself a 17-minute window without intending to. She drove faster after that. She pushed to 72 and watched the second marker recalibrate, watched it accelerate on the screen, maintaining the 17-minute gap with the same mechanical precision. Whatever it was watching her speed. It was matching her. It was not 17 miles behind her. Miles varied with speed. It was 17 minutes, always 17 minutes. Just after midnight, 30 miles west of Joplin, she heard herself on the CB radio for the second time, not her current voice. A recorded message wouldn't explain it either because what the voice said was specific to the moment. Joplin's 40 miles back, weather's clear through St. Louis. She had not said this. She was thinking it, she was literally thinking it, but she had not keyed her mic. She keyed her mic now and said, "Who is this?" And the voice said, "Who is this?" And Patricia Sullivan felt the hair on her arms lift under her jacket, and she pulled to the shoulder and stopped and sat with the engine running and the CB hissing static and the GPS showing her own position. And 17 minutes behind, the second blue marker decelerating. Decelerating, slowing down. Whatever was 17 minutes behind her was slowing to compensate for her stop. It was going to maintain the gap. She opened her door and stepped out onto the shoulder of I-44 at 12:14 in the morning, the winter air cold enough to hurt, and she walked to the back of her trailer and looked west down the highway. Headlights at a distance, ordinary traffic. She watched for 2 minutes. No truck pulled over, no hazards flashed. Whatever was 17 minutes behind her on the GPS was invisible to the naked eye. She called her son 19 in college in Stillwater. She had two numbers she called when she was genuinely frightened, and his was one of them. He didn't answer. She called her sister. Her sister answered, and Patricia told her about the GPS marker and the CB voice, and her sister, who was not the practical one, asked if she was sure she hadn't been listening to another trucker on the CB. And Patricia said yes, she was sure, and her sister said maybe it was some kind of GPS fleet tracking thing. And Patricia said her name was on the marker. Though there was a silence. Your own name," her sister said. "My truck number, same as my name in this context." Patricia, her sister said, "You need to pull into a truck stop and stay there until daylight." She didn't, she drove. She drove because the produce had a delivery window and because she was Patricia Sullivan, who had driven through a tornado warning and continued to her delivery. And she drove because somewhere in the back of her mind, she was curious in the way that practical, unimaginative people are sometimes helplessly curious. She wanted to know what happened when she reached St. Louis. She wanted to know if the second marker would follow her all the way to the distribution center. She wanted to know what happened when the gap closed. She found out something different instead. At the Missouri state line, 37 miles outside Joplin, she passed mile marker 11. She noted it automatically, the way all long-haul truckers mentally catalog mile markers. 4 minutes later, she checked her GPS and the second blue marker was at mile marker 11. The 17-minute gap had collapsed to 4 minutes. She looked at the GPS. She looked at the road. She recalculated. For 17 minutes to collapse to 4 minutes, the second marker would have had to accelerate to approximately 160 miles per hour over the past 40 miles. The second marker was not a vehicle that could travel at 160 miles per hour on a public highway in Missouri at 12:30 in the morning without anyone noticing. She was doing 72. If the gap was 4 minutes at their respective speeds, the second marker would reach her position in 4 minutes. Patricia Sullivan floored the accelerator and pushed her reefer unit to 83 miles per hour, which was the fastest she had ever driven a loaded trailer in her 11 years. And she watched the GPS with one eye on the road and one eye on the screen, and she watched the second marker accelerate to match her speed, and she watched the 4-minute gap hold steady, and she drove the last 31 miles to the Joplin Flying J in 6 minutes under her usual time, pulled into the lot, set her brakes, and sat shaking with both hands on the wheel while her engine ticked, and the parking lot lights buzzed and the CB hissed, and said nothing in her voice or any other. As the GPS showed her own marker at the Flying J, the second marker was at mile marker 11, 17 minutes behind. The gap had reconstituted itself. She slept in the cab for 4 hours. She woke up at 5:15. She checked the GPS. The second marker was gone. She made her delivery window in St. Louis by 40 minutes, and the dispatcher congratulated her on her time, and she said thank you and didn't mention what had happened because there was nothing to say that wouldn't result in a mandatory rest period and a psychological evaluation that she didn't have time for. She was practical. She had a schedule. But she started keeping a log after that. She wrote down every anomaly, every reroute that didn't correspond to construction, every CB transmission that used her voice, every moment when the dispatch tracking system showed her in two places at once, which happened twice more in the following 6 months. Always on the same corridor, always on I-44, always the same 17-minute gap. The last log entry is dated September 4, 2023. The entry reads, "The second marker was at mile marker 67 for 4 hours. It didn't move. I parked and waited. It didn't move. After 4 hours, I drove past mile marker 67. There was nothing on the shoulder, no truck, no lights. The pavement was clean except for a stain I didn't look at closely because I didn't want to know what color it was." The gap is 17 minutes because that's how long it takes to bleed out from a femoral artery severed by the edge of a steering column. I looked it up. I don't know what that means. I don't know why I looked it up. I'm going to ask to be reassigned off this corridor. She was reassigned. She drives the I-80 corridor now, Chicago to Sacramento. The GPS has been normal. The CB has been normal. She checked her new GPS unit carefully before accepting the assignment, and the unit showed only one blue marker, and the marker was hers, and it moved only where she moved it. Last week, somewhere in Nebraska at 3 a.m., the GPS chimed. Software update, the screen said, refreshing route data. And when the screen came back, there were two blue markers on I-80, Patricia's and one other, running east while she ran west, 9 states away. So 17 minutes ahead. So story 8, the weight of the load. The cargo manifest said 32,000 pounds of commercial tile. Marcus Chen had loaded it himself at the distribution warehouse in Phoenix, watched it get shrink-wrapped, watched the forklift operator lock it onto his flatbed at 7 in the morning on June 12, 2023. He'd weighed in at the Phoenix weigh station at 78,400 pounds gross, which was correct, which was legal, which was exactly what 32,000 pounds of tile in a truck of his weight class should produce. By the time he hit the weigh station outside Lordsburg, New Mexico, 169 miles down I-10, his gross weight had increased by 4,300 pounds with no stop, no pickup, no explanation. He knew the number was wrong before the attendant came out. He could feel it in the way the truck was sitting lower on its suspension. He could feel it in the slight lag when he'd accelerated out of Deming, the engine working harder than 32,000 pounds Zeph tile required. He'd been driving heavy loads for 14 years, and he knew his truck's relationship with weight the way a musician knows the feel of an instrument. And something on his flatbed had gotten heavier over the past 169 miles of empty desert highway. The attendant gave him a citation for overweight and told him he'd need to redistribute or reduce load before continuing. Marcus got out and walked the length of his flatbed in the New Mexico heat and saw nothing. The shrink wrap was intact. The pallet positions were unchanged. The tile was exactly as he'd loaded it, but the truck weighed 4,300 pounds more than it had in Phoenix. He called the distribution company. They told him that was impossible. He called his insurance company. They told him to document everything, which he did, photographing every inch of the load with his phone while the weigh station attendant watched from a skeptical distance. When he reviewed the photographs that evening at a truck stop in El Paso, he found 31 of the 32 pallets photographed normally. The 32nd pallet in the rear right position of the flatbed appeared in every photograph as a slightly blurred rectangle, as if it were vibrating at a frequency his camera couldn't resolve. He zoomed in on every shot. The blur was consistent. The blur was impossible. Shrink-wrapped tile does not vibrate. He was assigned a temporary permit for overweight travel and cleared to continue to his delivery in Houston. He drove the 450 miles to Houston over the next 2 days, and at every weigh station the weight had increased. Lordsburg, 82,700. Sierra Blanca, Texas, 85,400. The inspection station outside Van Horn, 87,100. By the time he reached the Houston delivery facility, his truck was running 91,600 pounds, 13,200 pounds over his Phoenix weight, 2,600 pounds over legal maximum for a Class 8 vehicle, and every single pound of it invisible on a flatbed with intact shrink-wrap and pallets that had not moved. The receiving warehouse had a floor scale. His load registered 47,200 pounds. 47,200 pounds of commercial tile. 15,200 pounds more than he'd loaded. 15,200 pounds of tile that had not been on his truck when he'd left Phoenix. He refused to sign the delivery confirmation. The receiving manager, a compact man in a yellow hard hat named Dennis, told him the scale was certified and that 47,200 was what the scale said, and that was what the delivery paperwork was going to show. Marcus told Dennis that he had loaded 32,000 pounds of tile personally in Phoenix and had documentation. Dennis told Marcus that what was on the truck was what was on the truck, and that the paperwork reflected physical reality. Marcus walked back out to his flatbed and cut the shrink wrap on the rear right pallet. He'd told himself he wasn't going to look. He'd told himself the practical thing, the sensible thing, the thing a 14-year driver who wanted to keep his CDL and his sanity did, was sign the paperwork and drive away and let the weight discrepancy become someone else's problem. He'd told himself this with some conviction in the cab during the 450-mile drive from the Lordsburg Way station. But now he was standing in a Houston warehouse bay in the afternoon heat with a box cutter in his hand, and the shrink wrap fell away in a sheet, and he looked at the pallet. It was tile. Commercial tile, 4-inch by 4-inch, white with a gray vein pattern exactly matching the specification on the manifest. Exactly matching the 31 other pallets. The tile was stacked correctly, banded correctly, in every visible way identical to every other pallet on the truck. The tile on the bottom layer of the pallet was wet. Not damp, not condensation wet. Soaked, dark wet, the cardboard underlayer saturated and soft, the kind of wet that happened when something liquid had been trapped inside the pallet for a long time. Marcus crouched down and touched the wet cardboard and his fingers came away dark, and he stood up and walked out of the warehouse and got into his cab and drove away without signing the delivery confirmation. He drove to a rest stop on I-10 east of Houston. He spent 20 minutes with a water bottle and paper towels cleaning his fingers. The color didn't come out of the creases of his knuckles for 3 days. He told himself it was packaging dye. He told himself this every day for 3 weeks, which was how long it took for the nightmares to start. The nightmares were specific. In them, he was driving westbound, returning empty from Houston, and the truck was still heavy. He could feel the weight on the rear axle, the suspension compressed, and he was driving through the dark Chihuahuan desert, and the load on his flatbed was not tile anymore, but he couldn't see what it was because it was dark and he was driving and he couldn't stop. In the nightmare, he couldn't stop. The brakes were there and his foot was on them and nothing happened. Whatever was on the flatbed was getting heavier, and the weight kept distributing itself differently with each mile, shifting, repositioning, as if whatever he was carrying was alive and trying to find a comfortable position for a very long ride. The distribution company settled the paperwork discrepancy as a scale error. The Houston warehouse's scale was recalibrated, and the receiving manager Dennis submitted an amended report. Marcus's CDL record was clean. Nobody investigated the weight anomaly because nobody wanted to explain how a load of tile got 15,000 pounds heavier over a desert highway with no stops. Except someone did investigate. 3 months after the delivery, Marcus received a phone call from a woman who said she worked for an insurance adjusting company. She asked him about the Phoenix to Houston run. She asked if he'd noted any unusual GPS activity reroutes anomalous position data. He said no. She asked if he documented the weight discrepancy, which he had. She asked him what he'd found when he'd cut the shrink wrap, and he paused long enough that the silence was its own answer. On the pallet in position 32, she said, rear right. Oh, he confirmed it. The Lordsburg way station flagged your truck, she said. The weight signature. They have a secondary system, not official, not part of the DOT database that some stations run in certain corridors. It flags loads with what they call biological mass. She paused. Your load was flagged. Biological mass, he repeated. Weight that wasn't on the manifest. Weight that has a cellular density consistent with, she stopped. He heard her take a breath. We've had 17 reports from this corridor in the past 4 years, always the Phoenix to Houston run. Always a load that gains weight between the Phoenix way station and Lordsburg. Always a pallet in rear right position. What's biological mass in this context? Marcus said. It means it wasn't tile, she said, or it wasn't just tile. She gave him a case number. She told him to keep his documentation. She told him that if he was ever assigned the Phoenix to Houston I corridor again, he should request reassignment and not explain why. He requested reassignment. His company gave it to him without asking questions, which made him suspect they'd had the conversation before with other drivers. The tile was installed in a commercial building in the Houston Galleria area. He found this out from the delivery manifest when he finally requested a copy. He found the name of the building and he found a photograph of the finished installation. A lobby floor, clean white tile with gray veining, gleaming under fluorescent light, exactly as specified. He spent 20 minutes looking at the photograph. He was looking for the pallet in the rear right position. He was trying to calculate which section of the floor had been laid from those tiles. He stopped looking when he realized he didn't want to know which section. He didn't want to know where in that lobby the wet tiles had been laid, didn't want to know which squares of that clean, gleaming floor people walked across every day on their way to whatever waited beyond the lobby doors. He still hauls flatbed. He checks his weight at every station. He has not had an anomalous reading since the Houston run. His load weights are what they should be, and they stay what they should be, and the rear right position on his flatbed is always the last thing he loads and the first thing he checks. But sometimes, late on desert highways, he catches the truck sitting heavy in a way he can't account for, a settling of the suspension that shouldn't be there, and he grips the wheel harder and he doesn't stop and he doesn't look. He looks straight ahead at the highway. He watches his mirrors. He does not look at what he's carrying. He learned that in Houston. In the dark of the rear right position, under intact shrink wrap, beside a pallet of wet tile, learning not to look is the only thing that keeps you from knowing what's riding with you. Story 9, The Facility AT Exit 83. Denise Ramirez had been awake for 29 hours when the GPS directed her off I-90, and she followed it because the alternative was the cattle truck that had jackknifed ahead of her, and the 4-hour delay the trooper was calling on the radio. She was not in the habit of taking GPS reroutes blindly. She'd been driving tankers for 8 years, and she'd learned early that GPS had no respect for low clearances and weight limits. But the trooper had said 4 hours and her hazmat load had a receipt window and she took the reroute. Exit 83 off I-90, somewhere between Billings and Sheridan, Wyoming, at 3:47 in the morning. Though the exit ramp was in good repair, that was the first thing thought. The T hooked her. A lot of unmarked industrial exits in the Wyoming high desert were crumbled, patched, functional only by charitable definition. This one was freshly paved, white lane paint bright and unchipped, the curb cuts clean. Someone maintained this exit. Someone cared enough about exit 83 to repave it recently, which meant exit 83 had regular traffic, which meant the reroute made sense. The GPS directed her to a facility 1.4 miles off the interstate. She could see it as she came down the ramp, a campus of low buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence, the kind of anonymous industrial park that dotted these highways every 50 miles, the kind that could be agricultural supply or electrical equipment or any one of 100 things that needed to be near a highway but not on it. The lights were on, all of them. The whole campus was blazing white at 4 in the morning. She pulled through the security gate, which was open, swung back unattended, and followed the GPS to what it marked as a way station on its routing display. Not a truck stop, not a rest area, a way station. She hadn't requested way station routing. Her GPS had brought her to a private industrial facility and labeled it a way station. She parked in the indicated bay, which was clearly designed for a rig her size. She was going to call her dispatcher to get the route cleared, and then she was going to find the alternate way around the I-90 closure, GPS or no GPS. She picked up her phone. No signal. She checked the signal icon. Full bars, no signal. She tried to call out. The call connected. She could hear the characteristic open silence of a live connection, but no ring, no voicemail, just that open silence and something behind it, a low harmonic that might have been industrial equipment running somewhere in the campus buildings or might have been something else. She lowered the phone slowly. A man in a fluorescent vest appeared at her driver's side door. He was in his 40s, clean-cut, the kind of unremarkable face you'd forget before you'd finished looking at it. He was holding a clipboard. He knocked on the window with one knuckle, a polite knock, a professional knock, and smiled the way people in service jobs smiled when they were tired but trained. She cracked the window. "A manifest check," he said. "This won't take long." This isn't a way station," Denise said. "A compliance facility," he said. "Hazmat corridor inspection, federally mandated." He smiled again. "I know it looks unusual at this hour. We run 24/7, won't take long." She had carried hazmat loads for 4 years. She knew the federal inspection protocols. She knew every checkpoint, every regulatory framework, every form number and inspection cycle. There was no such thing as a privately operated, federally mandated hazmat compliance facility accessible by GPS reroute at 4 in the morning. There was no such thing. She put the truck in reverse. As the gate behind her was closed, she had not heard it close. The man in the fluorescent vest did not react. He was still smiling at her through the window, clipboard ready, patient the way people are patient when they know you cannot leave. "It'll take 15 minutes," he said. "Most drivers don't even need to exit the vehicle." Most drivers. Denise set her air brakes and thought with the clarity of someone who has spent 29 hours awake and arrived at a decision they would have made earlier if they'd been less tired. She thought, "I am in an enclosed facility that my GPS led me to. The gate is closed behind me. A person is waiting for my manifest. My phone has no signal. I have a full load of hazmat material in a tanker, and I am the only person here who knows any of this." She turned on her four-way flashers. She activated her CB radio. She went to Channel 9, the emergency channel, and she said her dot number and her approximate location and the exit number, and that she was in a facility she could not identify with the gate closed behind her. She said it twice. She kept her voice level. She was a tanker driver and she had trained for hazmat emergency communication, and she communicated clearly. The static on Channel 9. The kind of static that meant nobody was listening. The man in the fluorescent vest was still outside her window. His smile had not changed. It had not changed in the 3 minutes she'd been running her CB traffic, and she was now aware that a person's smile naturally changes over 3 minutes, softens, shifts, reforms, reflects their internal state, and this man's smile had not changed by a single millimeter. As she looked past him at the facility buildings, low industrial single-story except for one structure at the rear of the campus that had a second level. The lights in that structure were on, yellow-white fluorescent through translucent panels. She could see movement in the upper level, shapes moving behind the translucent panels. Regular, repetitive movement, the kind made by the machinery, or the kind made by people on an assembly line. She was thinking about that movement, trying to resolve what she was seeing into something innocent when she noticed the other trucks. 3 of them, parked along the south fence, nosed into the loading bays of the main building. She hadn't seen them when she'd pulled in because they were running dark, no cab lights, no marker lights, and they were parked at an angle that put their rear plates in shadow. Standard commercial rigs. No identifying marks she could see from her position. Empty cabs. 3 trucks with running lights off, and empty cabs parked at a facility that closed its gates behind you at 4 in the morning. The man knocked on her window again. "Manifest," he said. "It's a simple process." Denise released her air brakes. She put the truck in gear. She drove directly at the gate. It was a standard chain-link security gate, 9 feet tall, on a rolling mechanism. It was not designed to stop a fully loaded Class 8 tanker at 10 miles per hour. The gate took the hit, bent at the latch, and swung hard into its housing. She took the exit ramp at a speed she would not report to her company. She got back to the interstate and drove south, and when her phone signal came back, she called dispatch and told them about the gate, and told them to document it, and said she'd cover the repair cost if it came to that. The dispatch asked for the facility name. She didn't have it. She hadn't seen a name. She looked at her GPS, and the GPS showed her on I-90 with no indication of the detour, no saved route, no history of the exit she'd taken. The GPS had no record of exit 83. She marked her mile position and called the Wyoming DOT the next morning. Exit 83 off I-90 in that corridor was a decommissioned access road, closed since 2009, officially barricaded. The DOT representative said any driver claiming to have accessed exit 83 off I-90 in the current configuration of that highway would have needed to pass through a concrete barrier that had been in place for 14 years. Denise told him she had passed through a concrete barrier. She made her delivery window. She submitted her incident report. The GPS unit was sent back to the manufacturer and reviewed and returned with a note that said the device had shown no anomalous activity in diagnostic testing. She never found out what the facility was. She found a truckers forum post from 2019 where a driver described stopping at what he called a ghost way station off a Wyoming interstate, and his description matched hers precisely. The open gate, the fluorescent vest, the clipboard, the closed gate, the dark trucks. He'd stayed. He'd submitted his manifest. He described the interior of the facility in 3 sentences before the post ended, mid-word, the way a connection drops, and no subsequent posts appeared from that username. She searched the username on every forum and database she had access to. The carrier database had a DOT number that matched the profile. The driver's record ended on a date in 2019, not retired, not transferred. Ended, the way a file ends when there's nothing more to enter. She drives a different corridor now. She has a GPS unit she trusts. She doesn't take reroutes at night, not anymore, not ever, not for any delay on any interstate in Wyoming or anywhere else. Last month, her daughter asked her why she always checked the gate behind her when she pulled into any facility, always, before she did anything else. Why she always made sure she could see the exit. Denise told her it was just habit. It isn't habit, it's the man in the fluorescent vest. It's his smile that didn't change. It's the thought she can't stop having late on night runs through empty highway about what the 3 dark trucks were delivering and what the moving shapes on the second level were assembling and what the process was that didn't require drivers to exit their vehicles. Most drivers, he'd said. Almost. So story 10, the driver in the other cab. James Whittaker recognized the truck because it was his truck. Same make, same model, same color, same CB antenna bent at the exact angle he'd bent it backing into a loading dock in Flagstaff in the spring. He saw it in his passenger mirror at dusk on November 19, 2023, running alongside him on I-15 north of Las Vegas, keeping pace at exactly 68 miles per hour. And when he looked over at the other cab, he saw himself sitting in the driver's seat. Not someone who resembled him, himself. 47 years old, 6'1", gray at the temples, wearing the green flannel shirt he was wearing right now, sitting with both hands on the wheel and looking straight ahead at the road. The other James Whittaker did not look at him. James had been driving owner-operator for 9 years, southwestern routes primarily, and he had spent enough time in the desert to develop a working relationship with the particular quality of light in the Nevada backcountry. Try at dusk, which was deceptive enough to justify most optical illusions. He watched the other truck and the other him for 30 seconds, waiting for the light to shift and reveal the error. The light shifted, the other truck remained. He dropped back to 62 miles per hour. The other truck decelerated to match. He could see his own face clearly, the set of his jaw, the particular way he held his left hand at 10 o'clock on the wheel, the bent antenna on the passenger side. He pressed his accelerator to 74. Well, the other truck matched him in under 3 seconds. His GPS, a Magellan roadmate he'd owned for 6 years, had been tracking his route north from Las Vegas towards Salt Lake City when it had begun displaying an anomaly 40 minutes before the truck appeared. A second route line, parallel to his own, drawn in the GPS's red alternate route color rather than the standard blue. When he tapped the screen, the alternate route showed an ETA to Salt Lake City of 6 hours 41 minutes, exactly 4 minutes less than his current route's ETA. The red line tracked exactly his blue line. The only difference was the 4 minutes. He dismissed it as a display error. Now he was watching his own face look straight ahead at the Nevada highway, and he was recalculating what a 4-minute discrepancy between two identical routes might mean. He grabbed his CB and went to Channel 19 and said, "Northbound White Kenworth, Channel 19, you copy?" There were two northbound White Kenworths on this stretch of I-15. He was one of them. He waited. "A copy," said his own voice from the CB speaker. He sat with the mic in his hand for what felt like a very long time. The voice had been immediate. No delay. The voice had been waiting. Who is this?" he said. "Who is this?" the CB said back in his voice with his cadence, with the slight nasal flatness he'd always had and hated about recordings of himself. He turned his head and looked directly at the other cab. His face turned and looked directly at him. The other him was smiling. James Whittaker was not smiling. His own face in the other cab was arranged in an expression he had never seen in any mirror. A wide, symmetric smile with too much visible teeth, the kind of smile that appeared on faces in situations where smiling was the wrong response. His own eyes under that smile were dark and fixed and absolutely certain, the way eyes looked in photographs of people who already knew what was going to happen next. He floored it. He pushed the Kenworth to 81 miles per hour, the fastest he'd ever run this rig, and the other truck matched him instantly. Not gradually, instantly, as if it had been waiting for this specific speed, as if 81 was a speed it had already mapped. He tried the phone. Full signal, dead call. The standard anomaly, the standard useless full bar silence that every driver on these stories knew by instinct, meant the signal was being eaten by something that looked like a signal but wasn't. He looked at his GPS. The red alternate route line had moved. It was no longer parallel to his route. It was 1 mile behind him. He looked in his mirror. The other truck was 1 mile back. The GPS and the physical truck were synchronized. The alternate route was not a route, it was a tracking line. He went through his options with the speed of someone who drove alone for a living and had learned to solve problems himself because problems on the highway did not wait for consultation. He could pull over. He did not pull over. He could try to get ahead of the other truck, far enough ahead to lose it. He did not see how that was possible when the other truck was already demonstrating that it would match any speed he ran. He could find a truck stop, a way station people light, a situation where the other truck would have to stop being a thing that existed and go back to being a hallucination or a coincidence. He saw the lights of the way station sign 6 miles ahead, and he drove toward it and watched the red line on his GPS fall 3 miles back, and then 2 miles back, and then 1 mile back, and then the GPS made a sound he had never heard it make. A low two-tone chime, the kind of chime you heard when a device was presenting you with a warning, and the red line moved forward. Past his position. The red line jumped ahead of his blue line by 4 minutes worth of distance and held there, and James looked in his driver's side mirror and the other truck was gone. He looked in his passenger mirror. Gone. He looked ahead. The highway was empty in both directions. The GPS chimed again and the red line vanished. He drove to the way station on shaking legs and pulled into the inspection lane and sat with his engine running and his hands pressed flat on his thighs to stop the shaking. The way station attendant came out, a large woman in her 50s named Terry per her badge, and she processed his paperwork with the indifferent competence of someone four. Hours from the end of a long shift, and James wanted to ask her if she'd seen another white Kenworth northbound on 15, wanted to ask her if two identical trucks had rolled in together or if he'd been alone. But he didn't ask because the answer didn't matter and the answer might be the wrong one. He drove north. He reached Salt Lake City 4 hours 57 minutes later. He was 4 minutes faster than his GPS had predicted at the start of the run. He sat in the truck stop parking lot for a long time with that calculation running through his head. His GPS had predicted 6 hours 45 minutes. He'd arrived in 4 hours 57, which was possible if he'd maintained the speeds he'd run near Las Vegas. The math worked. The math worked if you treated the number as coincidence, which James was attempting to do with the focus of a man trying to lift something very heavy by sheer belief that it would move. The red alternate route had shown a 6-hour 41-minute ETA, 4 minutes faster than his original route. He'd arrived 4 minutes faster than his original prediction. The red route had not been an alternate. It had been a timetable. He filed no report because there was nothing to file. He described the incident to another driver at the truck stop, a veteran from New Mexico named Carla who had 22 years on the road and who listened without interrupting and who nodded when he finished as if confirming something she'd already known. "Oh, you didn't let it get ahead of you," she said. Oh, he asked what that meant. She picked up her coffee cup. "Drivers who do," she said. "They finish their run fine, better than fine. They make up time they shouldn't have been able to make. Dispatch is happy, everything's good." She put the cup down. "Until their second run on that stretch or their third, and then one run they just don't arrive. The truck comes in, loads delivered, paperwork's in the cab, but the driver," she shrugged. "The truck does the last run on its own, I guess, or whatever is driving it does." James Whittaker requested route reassignment the next morning. He now drives I-10 east-west, which he has driven for 13 months without incident. He has a GPS he trusts. He has the CB on channel 19, and when he hears his own voice on the channel, he waits. He's heard it twice in 13 months, both times on stretches of desert highway at dusk, and both times he's pulled to the shoulder and waited, heart going, until the voice stopped. He has not seen the other truck again. He doesn't know what it wanted or what it was or what it means that it knew his route better than he did, 4 minutes better, exactly the margin that mattered. He knows only what Carla told him and what he's worked out from the math. The red line was always 4 minutes ahead. 4 minutes ahead and waiting for him to fall behind it. He doesn't know what happens 4 minutes behind. He doesn't know what the other him was driving toward with that wide-toothed smile and those certain eyes, doesn't know what waited at the far end of a route that ran exactly parallel to his own and arrived exactly 4 minutes before he did. He only knows this. Somewhere on I-15 north of Las Vegas in the gray Nevada dusk, his route runs parallel to something else's route. His timetable runs 4 minutes behind something's timetable. And every night he makes that calculation 4 minutes the distance between blue and red, between his route and the alternate, and he drives knowing that the margin is 4 minutes. And that 4 minutes is exactly enough time for a world to be replaced by one that looks exactly like it. He keeps both hands on the wheel. He watches the GPS. He doesn't smile. If the other him is still out there, somewhere on some mirror road that runs just ahead of the real one, he's still smiling. That much James is certain of, the smile doesn't stop. The smile he suspects never started as a smile at all.